The auctioneer slapped the gavel, and the room laughed before Diane could even breathe. Her ex-husband Grant leaned back with his arms crossed and said loud enough for everyone, "Go ahead, buy a gangster mansion. It fits a woman with nothing left." Diane's fingers shook around the bidder's paddle. The edge of her divorce decree still creased in her purse like a fresh bruise. She wanted to fire back, but the clerk and two deputies were already watching her, and the crowd was packed shoulder to shoulder like she was entertainment. The address was read into the microphone, an abandoned mansion nobody wanted, and a printed receipt slid across the counter with a bold timestamp, 10:14 a.m. In the corner, a small monitor showed the lobby camera feed recording everything, including Grant's smirk and the woman beside him snapping a photo. Now Diane signed anyway, walked out with her coffee gone cold, and told herself she just bought silence. But behind the clerk's desk, someone quietly saved the surveillance clip with Grant's words and took it home. By Monday morning, Diane Parker was back in her navy scrubs, hair pinned up, name badge straight, as if the courthouse laughter had never happened. She was 44, a hospice nurse who learned to keep her voice calm even when families fell apart in front of her. At St. Bridget's Care Center, the smell of coffee and antiseptic clung to the halls, and Diane moved room to room like steady weather, checking oxygen lines, rubbing lotion into paper-thin hands, listening when someone needed to confess more than pain. She carried small kindnesses the way other people carried keys. A spare charger for coworkers, like a pack of mints for anxious daughters. A soft blanket she bought herself but always ended up giving away. Her self-sacrificing habit was simple and constant. She skipped her own lunch so she could bring something warm to the night nurse who was raising grandkids on overtime. That morning she finished a shift, then drove straight to her mother's apartment to sort pills, reheat soup, and fix the wobbling railing by the front steps. Her teenage son, Caleb, needed a ride to tutoring, so she squeezed it between errands and a late bill payment that made her stomach knot. She didn't complain. She just kept going, because quitting wasn't an option and because dignity was the only thing Grant hadn't managed to take. On her break, her phone buzzed with a bank alert. The screen flashed, "Account access updated." What for a second she thought it was a routine notice, the kind you delete and forget. But her hands went cold when she saw the last four digits, an old joint account Grant had sworn was closed during the divorce. She tried to log in. Error. She tried again. Locked. A memory hit her like a slap. Grant's voice in the auction room, the way he'd said, "nothing left," like it was a fact he owned. Diane stared at the hospice courtyard where a winter tree scratched the sky, and she realized she'd been living off patched promises and half-truths for years. She called the number on the alert. A recorded message told her the next available representative would be within 45 minutes. In the background, a patient's call light chimed, urgent and small. Diane swallowed, forced her feet to move, and told herself she'd handle it after her rounds. But when she opened her car door that evening, a folded note was tucked under her wiper. "Don't go to that mansion alone." By the time Diane reached her mother's apartment, the sun was already sliding behind the gray buildings. She carried groceries in one arm and a folder of hospice paperwork in the other, because her life had become one long shift with no clock out. Her mother, Ruth, sat in a recliner with a blanket over legs that no longer trusted her. Stroke rehab had cost more than Diane's car, and Medicare covered only enough to keep the debt breathing. On the kitchen table, pill bottles lined up beside a yellow legal pad where Diane wrote dosages like prayers. Caleb's backpack thumped against the wall as he came in from school, asking if she could sign his field trip form. Diane smiled, signed, and then slipped the paper under a stack of past due notices so he wouldn't see the red stamps. She had promised him stability, even if she had to build it out of duct tape. The mansion purchase was supposed to be a reset. Cheap property, a roof, and time. But the truth was uglier. Grant had walked away from the marriage with the retirement account, the house, and the story that Diane was unstable. He'd made sure the judge saw her as tired and emotional, not trapped and exhausted. When she'd tried to fight, Grant tightened the leash. He paid the lawyer with their old joint card, then demanded reimbursement. He told Caleb, sweet as syrup, that Mom was making choices and Dad was fixing the mess. Diane kept quiet because any scene meant fewer visitation weekends, and Caleb still loved him. Now she opened the mail at Ruth's table. One envelope was certified, heavy with official weight. Inside was a notice. Leon filed. Property transfer under review. Diane reread the line until the letters blurred. The abandoned mansion's address was printed beneath it, and next to it, Grant's attorney's name. Her phone buzzed immediately like he'd been waiting. A text from Grant. "You can't hide in that dump. Sell it back to me and we'll stop this." Diane looked at her mother's trembling hands and Caleb's hopeful face, and she understood the trap. If she lost the mansion, she lost her last chance at a home. Diane folded the lien notice, slid it into her purse, and forced herself to stand tall. She didn't have money for another lawyer, and she didn't have time to fall apart. She had a key to a mansion everyone feared, and a safe inside marked with his name. She just had to get there before Grant did. And somewhere in town, Grant's lawyer was already scheduling a locksmith for the mansion's front door. Diane drove out past the last strip mall and the last streetlight, following the river road until the town thinned into bare trees and old fences. The mansion rose at the end of a cracked driveway like a forgotten promise. 3 stories of stone and dark brick, arched windows filmed with dust, ivy clawing up the columns. A rusted iron gate hung open, creaking in the wind as if the property itself was warning her to turn around. She parked and sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel. The air smelled like wet leaves and cold water. Somewhere in the distance, a freight train groaned, slow and lonely. Diane glanced at the note she'd found under her wiper. "Don't go to that mansion alone," and felt her throat tighten. But she had no one to call who wouldn't repeat Grant's version of her. So she tucked the note into her pocket and stepped out. The front steps were wide enough for a wedding photo, but the wood under her boots sighed like it was tired. The key from the auction was heavy and unfamiliar. When the lock finally turned, the door opened into a grand foyer that still carried a hint of old money. Marble tiles, a sweeping staircase, a chandelier wrapped in cobwebs like gauze. Every sound she made traveled. Her breathing, the click of her flashlight, the soft scrape of her shoe on grit. On the wall near the entry, a small metal box blinked a single green light. Diane leaned closer. Security system, online. Under it, a camera the size of her thumb pointed straight at the front door, its lens clean compared to everything else. That didn't make sense. Nobody maintained this place. Nobody even wanted it. She moved deeper, passing a dining room with a long table and chairs covered in white sheets like ghosts waiting for dinner. In the library, built-in shelves towered to the ceiling, most of them stripped bare, but one shelf had a fresh rectangle of dust missing, as if a book had been taken recently. Diane's phone buzzed with no service, just a vibration like a warning. She turned back toward the foyer and froze. A man stood outside the front window, close enough to fog the glass with his breath. For half a second she thought it was a trespasser. Then he lifted his head, and she recognized the posture, the confident stillness. It was Grant, and he wasn't alone. Someone behind him raised a phone to record her through the glass. Grant Parker didn't knock. He tested the doorknob like he owned it, then smiled at the phone his girlfriend held up. "There she is," he said, loud, like Diane was a stray animal he'd finally tracked down. He was 48 and always looked pressed and polished, even in the cold. Dark coat, cufflinks, a watch that caught light on purpose. In their marriage, he'd played the generous provider in public, then handed Diane an allowance at home, taking her cards for safekeeping whenever she questioned a charge. If she cried, he called it hysteria. If she asked for receipts, he called it disrespect. After the divorce, he tightened the screws. The joint account, the one he swore was closed, was still wired to her credit history. As one tap and he could lock her out, then tell the court she couldn't manage money. It was the same move he used on vendors at work. Starve them, blame them, then swoop in as the savior. Now he pointed at the mansion behind her, voice sweet as poison. "You can't live here, Diane. It's unsafe. It's condemned." His girlfriend, Brandy, the woman from the auction, panned her phone across the broken porch, then back to Diane's face, hunting for tears. Diane stayed still because Grant had brought backup. A man in a reflective jacket holding a clipboard, and another with a tool bag and fresh brass locks. Not deputies this time, but the kind of official people who made neighbors believe whatever story was told first. Grant's motive wasn't love or regret. It was control, and it was reputation. And he was up for a regional promotion at the bank's real estate arm, the kind that came with a country club board seat. A scandal would kill it. And somewhere in this mansion, Grant's eyes kept flicking toward the entry hall, was something he could not let Diane touch. He stepped closer to the window, lowering his voice so only she could read his mouth. "Sell it to me. Tonight. Or I make you look crazy again." Across the driveway, the locksmith lifted his drill, while Brandy hit "Live," and Grant raised his hand like he was about to give a speech to an audience. Brandy kept her phone high, angling it so Diane was framed in the mansion's doorway like a headline. "Guys, remember the courthouse lady?" she chirped to her live stream. "She actually thinks she can move into this place. Look at her." The red recording dot glowed. Yunnan comments popped up fast enough that Brandy's eyes flicked down with little satisfied smiles. Diane recognized her perfume even through the cold air. Sharp, expensive, too confident for someone standing on a rotting porch. Brandy wasn't just the girlfriend. Diane had seen her once before, months ago, at Grant's bank holiday event, clinging to his elbow while executives laughed. Brandy worked in the bank's marketing office, the kind of woman who collected powerful men like stepping stones. Tonight she looked at Diane the way people look at a broken chair, something to drag to the curb. Grant lifted his chin toward the man with the clipboard. "Tell her." The clipboard man cleared his throat. "Miles Harkins, County Code Enforcement. We received a complaint. Possible unsafe occupancy. A possible fraudulent transfer." He held up papers with a county seal, then glanced at Diane's shaking hands like he already expected her to crack. Behind him, the locksmith unzipped his bag and laid out a drill, fresh locks and a shiny new deadbolt. "I have the deed," Diane said, voice tight. Grant's smile didn't reach his eyes. "You have a piece of paper. I have people who know what it means." Brandy zoomed in on Diane's face. "Say hi, Diane. The viewers love a comeback story." Her tone made it sound like Diane's humiliation was entertainment, not a life. Diane wanted to scream, to lunge, to rip the phone away, but she couldn't. One wrong move, one raised voice, and Grant would clip it, post it, send it to his lawyer, and call it proof she was unstable. With the locksmith and the inspector standing there, even a neighbor peeking from a curtain would assume Diane was the problem. She stepped back into the foyer, heart punching her ribs, and her flashlight beam caught the security monitor on the wall. The front door camera was still running. Clear audio, clear faces, clear timestamp. On the screen, Grant leaned close to the glass and mouthed, "Sell it to me tonight." Then the monitor flashed remote user connected, H green, and the system began saving Grant's threat in real time. Miles Harkins stepped onto the porch like he'd done this 100 times. He pulled a bright red tag from his folder and slapped it against the front door frame where the camera could see it. "By authority of the county," he announced, voice loud for Brandy's live stream, "this structure is under temporary restriction, pending inspection." Brandy whispered to her phone, delighted. "He's literally tagging it. Oh my gosh." Grant didn't even pretend to be kind. He leaned in and spoke like a man giving a lesson to a child. "Diane, you can stop this little fantasy. You're not some brave survivor. You're a desperate woman squatting in a ruin." The words stung because the crowd wasn't just here on the driveway anymore. It was online, multiplying by the second. Brandy's screen reflected in the window glass, a flood of comments and laughing emojis. Diane could feel eyes on her from inside cars passing on the river road, slow enough to look. She could also feel the mansion's camera watching, recording her silence like guilt. "I bought this legally," Diane said, keeping her tone flat. Her wedding ring was long gone, but her finger still felt cold without it, like a missing promise. Miles pointed at the paperwork. "Ma'am, we have a complaint alleging fraud. If you refuse to comply and remain inside, you can be cited for trespass until the review is complete." "Trespass," Brandy repeated into the phone, savoring the word. "You hear that? Trespass." Diane's chest tightened. One shout, one step too close, and Grant would have a clip to send his lawyer. So she did what hospice had taught her. Breathe, count, endure. She backed down the porch steps slowly, hands visible, swallowing every sharp sentence. The locksmith opened his tool bag and began measuring the door. Grant's voice softened, almost private, the way it used to when he wanted something. "Sign the acknowledgement, Diane. Walk away tonight. I'll make this easy." Miles held out a pen. Diane stared at it, understanding the trap. Sign, and it looks like she admits wrongdoing. Refuse, and Grant paints her as reckless. Her phone buzzed again, another alert she couldn't open, while Brandy's live stream kept rolling. Diane took a step toward her car, pretending she was leaving calmly. And that's when she heard Grant murmur to the locksmith, just over the wind, "Forget the front door. Once we're inside, go straight to the library panel. That safe has to be gone before she comes back." Diane froze because now she knew exactly what he was really here to steal. Diane forced her face into calm and walked to her car like she was surrendering. She even clicked the lock twice, the way Grant used to demand, so Brandy's phone could catch proof that Diane was leaving. Inside, her hands shook so hard she could barely start the engine. But she didn't drive away. She rolled to the far edge of the property and parked behind a thicket of dead shrubs, where the mansion's front camera couldn't see. From there, she watched Grant talk with Miles and the locksmith, all three of them clustered at the porch like a small tribunal. Brandy kept filming, smiling at her screen like humiliation was a hobby. Diane's stomach turned. If the county tagged the place, if Grant's lawyer pushed that lien through, she would lose the only roof she'd managed to buy with her last dollars. No house meant no stability. No stability meant Caleb's school would flag her. The court would listen to Grant again. She slipped out and followed the side of the mansion, staying close to the brick. Around back, a narrow service door hung crooked, its lock already broken. The air inside was colder than outside, as if the building stored winter in its walls. Her flashlight beam skimmed dusty portraits, peeled wallpaper, and an old control panel mounted near the kitchen. A green light blinked steady. Security system online. Diane pressed the screen. A menu opened like it had been used yesterday. Live feed, playback, export. In the corner, the date and time stamped every frame. She tapped playback and her own face appeared on video, standing in the doorway while Grant sneered and Brandy laughed. The microphone had caught every word, sharp as crystal. "Go ahead. Buy a gangster mansion. It fits a woman with nothing left." Then she heard it again, clearer than her memory. "Once we're inside, go straight to the library panel. That safe has to be gone." Diane's breath stopped. She didn't imagine it. The mansion had recorded it. A notification popped up. "Remote user connected, H. Green." Below it, another line flashed. "Auto backup enabled." Someone, somewhere, was watching this feed too. Diane hit export and slid her own thumb drive into the port, praying her hands would obey. The progress bar crawled across the screen. Outside, a drill whined at the front door. Across town, Harold Green opened the auto-saved clip on his laptop and recognized Grant's voice instantly. The drill bit screamed, and the front door finally gave. Diane heard the deadbolt snap and knew she'd lost the one advantage she had: time. She crouched beside the security panel in the back hall, yanked out her thumb drive, and shoved it into her pocket. Footsteps spread through the foyer. Grant's voice carried first, smooth and excited. "Careful, the camera sees this angle." Miles answered, "Mike, I'm documenting entry for the record." The locksmith grunted as he hauled his bag inside. Diane backed into the pantry, holding her breath. Dust coated the shelves, but a narrow window looked out to the driveway. Brandy was still filming, narrating like a game show. He's making sure she doesn't squat. Ladies, this is what boundaries look like. A flashlight beam sliced the kitchen. "Ma'am," Miles called. "Come out. If you're inside, you are now in violation of a restricted property notice." Diane stepped forward with her palms open. "I'm the owner. I'm not hiding. I'm securing it." Grant laughed softly. "See? Dramatic. Always dramatic." Then his eyes flicked to her pocket. "What did you take from the panel, Diane?" Miles held out a form on a clipboard. "Nia, sign here, acknowledging you received the restriction and agree not to occupy or interfere with inspection." The language was dense, the kind that turned a homeowner into a trespasser with one careless signature. "If I don't sign?" Diane asked. Miles nodded toward the doorway where Brandy's phone waited. "Then I call deputies for refusal to comply. You'll be removed. It will be noted." Grant leaned closer, low enough to feel like a hand around her throat. "And tomorrow I file an emergency petition. Unsafe housing, unstable behavior. I'll ask the judge to review Caleb's placement." He said it like a business plan. Diane's mouth went dry. She pictured her son's face, her mother's meds on that yellow pad, the lien notice on the table. One scene on video could cost her everything. She took the pen, hands steady by sheer will, and wrote her name. Only her name, on the line marked receipt. Grant's smile widened as if he'd won something precious. He slid a second envelope onto the counter, already notarized. "Now sign the real one," he said. "Or I tell the court you stole what's in that safe." And from the screen in Harold Green's office, the mansion camera kept recording every single word tonight. Grant slid the notarized envelope toward her like a knife. "This is a theft affidavit," he said, loud enough for Brandy's phone. "You broke in, tampered with the system, and stole from a family safe." Miles's eyebrows lifted. The locksmith paused, drill in hand. Brandy whispered, "Oh, wow, she's caught." And comments exploded across her screen. Diane's stomach dropped. "I haven't even opened the safe." Grant tapped the paper. "You don't have to. Yeah, the fact you tried is enough." He pointed at her pocket. "You're carrying something. Show them." She didn't move. If she pulled out the thumb drive, Grant would snatch it. If she refused, he'd spin it as guilt. Her mother's pill list sat folded beside the drive, the ink smudged from her sweaty fingers. Miles cleared his throat. "Ma'am, under restriction, you must leave the premises while we complete inspection." Grant smiled at the camera. "See, even the county agrees. She's unstable." Then, softer, for her alone. "Sign the transfer back to my company, Diane. Tonight, or tomorrow I file to review Caleb's custody." The name hit her harder than any insult. Diane saw her son's field trip form, buried under bills, saw his face when he asked if she'd be at his game. She felt the room tilt, not from fear for herself, but for him, and two headlights washed the foyer. Deputies stepped in, hands resting near their belts. "We got a call about a disturbance," one said, eyes flicking to Brandy's live stream. Grant raised the affidavit like a flag. "Remove her. She's trespassing and stealing evidence." Diane's cheeks burned. She wanted to shout that she was the owner, that he was lying, that the cameras were recording him. But the deputies were already guiding her toward the door, and Brandy kept filming her humiliation in close-up. As they pushed her outside, her purse snagged and spilled. A faded family photo, Grant holding Caleb on his shoulders, skated across the floor. Grant stepped on it without looking. Brandy laughed and read a comment out loud. She should have stayed grateful. Diane bit her lip until she tasted blood. On the porch, Diane's coffee cup toppled from her bag and rolled, spilling cold brown circles on the boards. A voice cut through the night. "Deputy, stop! This property's cameras recorded his threat, and I'm the one who saved it. The voice came from the driveway, steady and older. A man in a worn overcoat stepped into the headlights, holding up his phone like it was a badge. "Deputy, stop," he said again. "This property's cameras recorded everything. I'm the one who saved the clip." For a second, the porch went quiet except for Brandy's stream, still broadcasting Diane's red face and shaking hands. The deputies glanced at each other, then at Miles. Miles stiffened, the way people do when a plan stops going smoothly. Grant recovered fast. He let out a laugh like the whole thing was pathetic. "Who are you?" he called down. "Some random guy with a phone? See, anyone can edit a video." Brandy swung her camera toward the man. "Chat? Now we have a vigilante," she said, sweet and cruel. "This is getting good." A couple of passing cars slowed. A neighbor's porch light clicked on across the road. Someone whispered, "That's her," like Diane was a scandal you could catch by looking too long. Another voice answered, "Grant always seemed so respectable." The words landed like stones, heavy, unfair, final. Diane stood between the deputies and the open door, her honor hanging by a thread she couldn't grip. She wanted to tell the crowd about the lien, the locked bank account, the threats. But the moment she opened her mouth, Brandy zoomed in, waiting for a crack, waiting for proof that Diane was unstable. Miles raised his clipboard. "Sir, this is an active inspection," he snapped. "Now, step back." The man didn't. "I'm not interfering," he said. "I'm stating a fact. There's a time-stamped recording with clear audio." Grant's smile tightened. He leaned close to one deputy and spoke low, confident. The deputy nodded once, then guided Diane another step down, polite but firm. To anyone watching, it looked like Diane was the problem and Grant was the calm, reasonable one. Diane bent to gather what had spilled. The family photo was cracked now, her thumb smearing dirt off Caleb's face. She grabbed her purse, her keys, her mother's pill list, then felt her stomach drop. The courthouse receipt from the auction, the only proof in her hand that she owned this place, wasn't there. Diane looked up in time to see Grant slide a folded paper into his wallet, never breaking eye contact. "And from the driveway?" the older man said quietly. "If he took your receipt, then he's about to take something else next." Diane drove until the mansion disappeared in her mirror, and the river road turned into storefronts. She pulled into the back lot of St. Mark's Church because it was the only place she could breathe without an audience. The heater blew weak air over her knuckles, still raw from gripping the bidder's key. She set the cracked family photo on the passenger seat. Caleb's smile looked the same as always, but the glass spiderwebbed across Grant's face like a warning. Diane pressed her forehead to the steering wheel and let the sobs come, silent and ugly, the kind you swallow all day until your body rebels. "I did everything right," she whispered. Hospice shifts, rehab bills, homework rides, quiet apologies for things she didn't do. And still, Grant could snap his fingers and turn strangers into a wall. Her phone showed 3 missed calls from her mother's aide and 2 unread school emails. She couldn't answer yet. If she heard Ruth's tired voice, she would break in half. Diane opened her purse and spread the contents on the seat like evidence. Pills list, keys, a checkbook with $20 left, and the thumb drive warm from her pocket. The courthouse receipt was gone. So was the last illusion that Grant would ever stop. She opened Brandy's page by accident. One tap from a notification Caleb's friend had shared that night. There she was on video, blurred by night but clear enough. Diane being escorted off her own porch, Grant speaking calmly, Brandy laughing. The caption read, "Unhinged ex-wife trespasses." Diane's stomach rolled. She closed it fast, but the damage had already crawled under her skin. She pictured him stepping on their photo, smiling for Brandy's camera, calling her unstable. The rage came next, clean and sharp. Diane wiped her cheeks with her sleeve and spoke the truth out loud, as if saying it could make it real. "I'm done begging." She stared at the church door, thinking of the older man in the driveway, the one who said the cameras had saved the night. If the mansion recorded Grant's threats, then the truth existed somewhere outside Grant's hands. Diane turned the key off, sat up straight, and opened her notes app. She typed 3 words, "Get the footage." Then an unknown number lit up her screen, and a calm voice said, "If you want your life back, meet me now." Diane followed the directions from the unknown caller and slipped into St. Mark's side entrance, to pass the dark fellowship hall and the smell of old coffee. The office lights were on, but the door to the pastor's study was closed. Her phone buzzed again, pharmacy, and her stomach dropped. "Ms. Parker, your mother's blood thinner was ready, but the card on file declined. The total is $612. Diane stared at the screen like it had betrayed her. "Run it again," she whispered. Same answer. She opened her banking app. Locked. Password reset required. The alert from yesterday flashed like a taunt. Account access updated. She dug through her purse and counted what she had left. $47, a few loose coins, and the thumb drive. Ruth had 2 pills left in the bottle at home. After that, her mother's heart would be running without a leash. Her mother's aide called next, voice tight. "Ruth is out by morning," she said. "Her pressure's up, and she's scared." Diane promised she was coming, then hung up and felt her promise turn to ash. As she stood there, another call came through, this one from Caleb's school. "Mrs. Parker, your son was released to his father," the secretary said carefully. "He presented paperwork and said there was an emergency housing issue." Diane's breath stopped. "He can't do that." "I'm sorry, he's listed as a custodial parent. He also asked us to note that you were removed by deputies tonight." Her knees went weak. Grant hadn't just embarrassed her. He'd turned it into a record. A text from Grant arrived like a final shove. "Don't call Caleb. You'll confuse him. We'll talk after you sign." Diane tried anyway. It rang once, then cut to silence. A new email hit her inbox from Saint. "Bridget's HR, request for meeting. Reported incident involving patient-family contact." No details, just a time slot for the next morning. Diane knew what it meant. Someone had already sent the live video. In hospice, trust was everything. She walked out to her car and found another paper under her wiper, this one official. Trespass warning, River Road property. Her mansion address was stamped at the bottom along with a note. Locks changed. Diane sat in the driver's seat, hands empty, throat tight, feeling like the world had agreed to erase her. Then the church door opened behind her. A gray-haired man stepped into the lot and said, "Diane, I saw everything, and I saved the footage." Pastor Harold Green stood under the parking lot light like he belonged there, not like a stranger. Gray hair, steady eyes, hands that didn't shake. Not he held his phone out to Diane, screen glowing with a paused video frame. Grant on the porch, Brandy's red live dot reflected in the window, and Miles's clipboard angled toward the camera. "I'm Harold," he said. "Pastor here. Before that, I was the city council clerk for 18 years. I know what a real timestamp looks like, and I know what a staged complaint smells like." Diane's throat tightened. "How did you—" "The mansion's security system is still tied to an old community monitoring account," Harold said. "Years ago, the prior caretaker asked the church for help after break-ins. The system never got shut off. Tonight it pinged my laptop. Remote user connected. I watched your porch in real time." Diane's hands flew to her pocket, touching the thumb drive like it was the last piece of her life. "They changed the locks. He took my receipt. He took my son." Harold didn't flinch. "One problem at a time." He pointed to the video. "This audio catches Grant threatening you and directing the locksmith to the library panel. That's intent. That's coercion. And that county restriction tag?" He swiped to another screen, an email header and a scanned form. "The complaint was filed this afternoon before you even reached the property. Same printer signature the county uses. Someone inside code enforcement helped fast-track it." Diane's mouth went dry. Grant. "Likely," Harold said. "But we won't accuse, we'll prove." He nodded at her cracked family photo on the passenger seat. First, your mother's medication. I'll call Dr. Patel from our congregation and the pharmacy. We'll get an emergency fill tonight. Then he looked her in the eye. Second, Caleb, I will go to the school in the morning with the custody order and request the release notes. If Grant filed anything, we get the paper trail. A small sound escaped Diane, half laugh, half sob. Why are you doing this? Harold's voice softened. Because I watched a man step on a child's photo and call it righteousness. He reached into his coat and pulled out a thick folder, corners worn like it had been carried often. Property records, old court filings, names connected to that mansion. Harold held the folder to his chest and said, Meet me at 8 a.m. at the county office. I'll bring this file and we'll play your porch video for the right person. At 7:58 a.m., Diane stood outside the county office with Harold Green, her stomach tight from too much fear and not enough sleep. But she still smelled like antiseptic from an overnight hospice shift. Harold carried his worn folder like it was a shield. Inside, he led her straight to the records window. Linda, he called. A woman with reading glasses looked up, then softened when she saw him. Pastor Green, what trouble did you bring me before my first coffee? Not trouble, Harold said. Truth. They moved to a side desk while Linda logged into a county terminal. Harold played the porch clip. Grant's voice filled the small space. Threats, instructions, the line about the library panel and the safe. Linda's expression changed from polite to hard. That restriction tag, Linda said, tapping her keyboard, was entered yesterday at 2:17 p.m. She pulled up an audit screen and turned it toward Diane. It wasn't filed from code enforcement. Diane blinked. Then where? Linda zoomed in on the access log. From a public-facing portal, but authenticated with an internal credential. She pointed to the name. Miles Harkins. Then she clicked again, and another line appeared under it. Login Origin, Rivershore Bank Network. Diane's breath caught. Grant's bank. Harold leaned closer. Who can confirm that? Linda lifted a phone and made one call. 10 minutes later, a woman in a county badge and blazer strode over, jaw set. Angela Morris, she said. Director of Code Enforcement. She watched the clip once, then looked at Diane. Miles Harkins hasn't worked for us in 2 years. If someone used his credential, that's fraud. Angela turned to Linda. Print the access log and the complaint record, now. Grant's whole story, Diane trespassing, Diane unstable, Diane the problem, wobbled for the first time. Diane felt it, like a locked door finally giving an inch. Harold touched her elbow. Listen to me, he said, low and steady. You're not powerless. Angela slid the printed pages into a folder and handed it to Harold. With this, we can void the restriction, challenge the trespass warning, and open an investigation. If your ex is tied to that login, he's in serious trouble. Diane's hands trembled as she took the papers. Not panic this time. Purpose. Then Harold opened his worn file and showed her one last document, a sealed bid form for the mansion, dated 3 weeks earlier. The bidder name wasn't Diane. It was Grant's Real Estate LLC. Harold said, He didn't come to scare you. He came to retrieve what that safe holds, and now we're going back with the sheriff. The sheriff's deputy met them at the county lot, not with sympathy, but with procedures. Harold handed over the printed access logs, the complaint record, and the porch video on his phone. Timestamps match, Harold said. Audio is clear, and the restriction was filed from a bank network using a former employee's credential. Deputy Collins watched the clip twice, jaw tightening when Grant's voice said, Go straight to the library panel. That safe has to be gone. Then he turned to Diane. Ma'am, that's coercion on camera. If he entered after you told him to leave, that's a problem too. Diane swallowed. He already changed the locks. He already took my receipt. Angela Morris, the code enforcement director, stepped in with her own folder. Miles Harkins is not employed by this county, she said flatly. His credential should be inactive, yet someone used it. That's fraud, and I will sign an affidavit stating it. Harold opened his worn file and slid out the sealed bid form again, the one dated 3 weeks before the auction. He tried to buy the mansion first, Harold said. His real estate LLC filed a bid, then withdrew right before the sale. When Diane outbid the room, he lost access to whatever's in that safe. Deputy Collins looked from the paper to Diane. That explains why he escalated so fast. Diane's hands trembled, but her voice held. So the whole unstable trespasser story was a setup, Angela finished. A story built to move you out and move him in. Harold leaned close, low enough that only Diane could hear. You're not powerless. The words didn't feel like comfort. They felt like a key turning. They drove back in a line, patrol SUV first, then Diane's car, then Harold behind her. Yum at the mansion, Brandy's sedan was still there, and the new deadbolt gleamed like a fresh lie. The deputy knocked once, then tried the handle. Open the door, he called. Sheriff's office. Silence. Then footsteps, hurried inside. Deputy Collins lifted his radio. We have probable cause and documented fraud. If they run, we stop them. Diane stared at the dark library window, the place Grant had named like a target, and felt something shift from fear into focus. Harold said, Grant's promotion board meets at noon, and we're walking in with the footage, the logs, and whatever that safe holds. Diane watched Deputy Collins tape a notice to the mansion door while Harold stood beside her like a guardrail. The wind off the river cut through her thin jacket, but for the first time in weeks, the cold didn't feel like punishment. It felt like clarity. I'm not signing anything else, she said. Her voice surprised her, steady, flat, final. Collins nodded. Good. From here on out, we document. We don't argue. Diane looked at the cracked porch boards where Grant had tried to turn her into a joke. She pictured her son being walked out of school by his father, the secretary's careful tone, the pharmacy call about the declined card. Grant had played the same trick in every room. Make her chase, make her plead, then call her desperate. Not today. She opened her purse and pulled out the thumb drive. This is the porch clip, she told Collins. It has his threat and his instructions about the library panel. She handed Harold the drive, too. Make copies. Put it in more than one place. Harold's eyes softened. That's wisdom. On the drive back to town, Diane stopped at a discount store and bought one thing. A plain black blazer on clearance. No sparkle, no makeover fantasy, just armor that fit. In the parking lot, she texted her mother's aide. I'm on my way with meds. Then she texted Caleb. I love you. I'm coming for you the right way. She didn't ask permission. At St. Mark's, Harold helped her print the logs, the voided restriction memo, and Angela Morris's affidavit. Diane stapled them into a clean packet, front page labeled with the mansion address and today's date. Who, what, when, where. Evidence. She rehearsed one sentence in the mirror of the church bathroom. He used fraud to remove the legal owner and retrieve what he hid. No shaking, no apologies. When HR called again, she answered. I'll be there afternoon, she said. And I'll bring documentation. Harold glanced at the clock. Grant's board meets in 40 minutes. Diane slid the packet into her bag, zipped it, and squared her shoulders. Then we walk in before he can rewrite the story. She tightened her ponytail, wiped her palms, and chose truth over fear today. At the bank's glass doors, the security guard reached for his radio as Diane stepped forward and said, I'm here to speak to the board. Security's hand hovered over the radio, but Diane didn't step back. She set her toad on the marble counter, unzipped it, and placed a neat packet on the surface like a nurse laying out sterile tools. I'm not here to cause a scene, she said. I'm here to correct a record. The guard glanced at the header page, River Road Property / County Fraud Logs. Then at Harold behind her. Ma'am, you need an appointment. I have one, Diane said, and slid forward the printed calendar invite Harold had pulled from the bank's posted meeting agenda. Regional Promotion Review, Grant Parker. And if you block me, your lobby cameras will show you did. That got his attention. He nodded toward the receptionist. Call upstairs. Diane pulled out her ID and the receipt copy Harold printed from county records. The guard's eyes widened just now at the deed number. He lowered his voice. You're the buyer. While the phone rang, Diane breathed through her ribs the way she did in hospice rooms. She refused to look for Brandy, refused to search the lobby for Grant's shadow. Instead, she opened her folder and checked the order again. First the porch video timestamp, then Linda's access log printout showing the restriction filed at 2:17 p.m., and then Angela Morris's affidavit that Miles Harkins wasn't county staff, then the sealed bid form with Grant's LLC name. Her phone buzzed. HR again. Diane typed one line and hit send. I have evidence that last night's incident was staged. Meeting afternoon. Copies attached. She attached the logs. Then she forwarded the same email to Harold, to herself, and to the county director's office so it couldn't disappear. The receptionist covered the receiver and studied Diane's face. They'll see you, she said quietly. 14th floor, conference room B. The elevator ride felt longer than her whole marriage. Diane watched the numbers climb, hand resting on the thumb drive in her pocket like it was a pulse. When the doors opened, she stepped into a hallway lined with framed photos of ribbon cuttings and smiling executives. Grant's world? Clean and cold. A board assistant met her with a tight smile. Mrs. Parker? Diane, she corrected. And I'm the homeowner. The assistant reached for the packet. Diane didn't let go yet. Before you read, she said, you're going to watch. Behind the frosted glass, Grant's voice rose mid-sentence, and the door handle started to turn. The conference room door swung open, and Grant walked in mid-sentence, smiling like he owned the air. When he saw Diane at the end of the table, his smile stalled for a half-beat, just long enough for the board to notice. What is this? He demanded, forcing a laugh. My ex-wife is trespassing in my promotion review? Diane didn't answer him. She looked at the chairwoman instead. I'm the legal owner of the River Road property. Last night, mister. Now, Parker staged a county restriction to remove me and retrieve a safe inside that house. She pulled out the thumb drive. And the house recorded him saying it. A board assistant connected the drive to the screen. The video filled the room. Diane in the doorway, the red tag on the frame, Brandy's phone flashing, and Grant's voice, clear, time-stamped, saying, once we're inside, go straight to the library panel. That safe has to be gone before she comes back. Grant lunged forward. That's edited. Harold stepped in calmly. It's not. The security system auto-backed up the file. I have the original feed and the checksum. He laid printed pages on the table. And here is the county access log. Angela Morris walked in like a door closing. Director Morris, she introduced herself, placing her badge on the table. Miles Harkins is not a county employee. His credentials should be inactive. Yet the restriction was filed yesterday at 2:17 p.m. from a network labeled Rivershore Bank. A man in a suit at the far end, Bank IT, shifted in his chair and cleared his throat. That IP range is ours, he admitted, eyes on the printout. Someone inside our system submitted it. Grant's face went pale. This is harassment. She's unstable. She stole... Deputy Collins appeared at the doorway.